Former Nashville Mayor Karl Dean, welcome to the Fail It Forward podcast. We're so grateful for you stopping by.
Well, happy to be here. Thanks.
So you were born in South Dakota, I understand, but raised in Massachusetts. And I know just from having the opportunity to work with you over the years that you tend to be a little bit of a Red Sox fan.
Oh yeah, I'm a diehard Red Sox fan. I was, as you say, I was born in South Dakota. My parents were Midwesterners. My dad worked for IBM for a while, and then worked in the time recording company. And so we moved around a bit, and we ended up in Massachusetts when I was, I guess, in the 6th grade, and spent the rest of my youth there. We moved there in 1967. So if you're familiar with Red Sox history, that was the impossible dream team where Karl Yastrzemski won the Triple Crown, and they went from virtually last place the year before to the World Series.
Well, there is absolutely nothing like a summer evening at Fenway Park, slammed in there to a full house crowd, watching the Red Sox play. And, having a beer, having some peanuts, and just that is just an experience in life you have to have.
Oh, you do. I think the most interesting thing about it to me is when you go into the park and you walk through the tunnel, and it's an old park, and the interior part is kind of, I don't know, it's a lot of concrete and dark and everything. And you walk in, and then you're suddenly exposed to everything's just green all around you, this beautiful field, the green monster, obviously.
Sure. And
other green, and it's just it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, it is sacred ground for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. So you were involved in paving the way for minor league baseball to come to Nashville. Will Nashville ever have a major league team, do you think? I know there's an effort underway.
Yeah, well, I was involved. I wouldn't say I paved the way for minor league baseball in Nashville. We had a team. The Sounds were here. When I became mayor, the issue was the Sounds were playing in a stadium that had long gone through its good part, and we needed a new stadium, and we worked to get the downtown stadium done. I'm very familiar with the efforts going on in Nashville to bring a major league team here. I think Nashville will ultimately be a major league city. I think that's just kind of the trajectory we're on. When that happens, I don't know, and there's a lot of issues that have to be worked out around it. But I think the group that's working on it are focused. They know what they're doing. They have great contacts in baseball. I don't know whether it happens in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, but at some point, Nashville will be a major league team. It just makes all the sense in the world.
Absolutely.
I would predict that it would probably be a National League team. I'm an American League fan, obviously. But I think most people here, probably Braves number 1, Cardinals number 2, then Reds. Yep. So it's kind of more of a National League city, but I could see an American League team doing well here.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That'll be another exciting day in Nashville. Once Major League Baseball arrives, whenever that happens. Let's jump into the conversation. You and I share a little bit of a journey in that we were both litigators prior to moving into different kind of leadership roles. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as a litigator, every day is full of winning and losing. Whether you're filing a motion or whether it's a full-blown trial, it's just winning and losing all day long, every day. And yet you're passionately trying to serve clients. You're passionately trying to win. Talk a little bit about your experiences as a litigator and how those prepared you for more public leadership roles.
Well, my background is that after getting out of law school, and I worked for a law firm in Massachusetts for a year and a half or so. And then when Ann and I got married and I moved back to Nashville in 1983, I joined the public defender's office as an assistant. Mm-hmm. And I had not thought about doing that type of work when I was in law school. But when I was working for this firm, I did a lot of stuff with clients' kids who got into trouble, or an employee who got some DUI or some problem.
Sure.
And I liked it because you were dealing with a human being. It wasn't, corporate, remote, a lot of contact with people. And it had a beginning and an end. It wasn't like some of the stuff I worked on that just went on for long years. And so when I came to Nashville again in 83, I wanted to do something in criminal law. Mm-hmm. Thought about prosecuting, thought about defending. The public defender had an opening, and I was hired. And and the work was just, to me, it was everything I wanted. I mean, you were in court all the time. You were able to try as many cases as you possibly wanted to. I think you actually helped people. I felt it was a real meaningful role. So I enjoyed it. And I did that work for about 16 years, which is a long time for someone to be a public defender. And I was elected public defender and ran the office for 9 years. But it meant a lot to me. And you learn a lot about, number one, you learn a lot about social problems. My clients' education is a huge issue. Yeah. You learn about whether alcoholism or drug addiction. You learn about the importance of people having good work, and the need for strong families. So, I mean, I got a lot out. I just learned a lot from it. And so then in '99, Bill Purcell asked me to be the director of law for the city, become the city's lawyer. And I guess I still thought of myself in a way as a litigator, but I didn't do a lot of litigation. I went to court occasionally, very occasionally, but you're more involved in the day-to-day sort of advising the mayor's office, trying to keep people up to date on what's going on legally. And I enjoyed that job because then you got this really broad knowledge of how the metropolitan government worked.
Sure.
So, two very different jobs, law director and Metro Public Defender, but both very rewarding. And I would encourage anybody, actually, when I think about my career, and I fell into a lot of these things, but when I think about my career, public service, young people need to think about that more. Because when I went into the PD's office, I had not thought about it, and it was just the right thing for me, and I wish I had exposed myself to that earlier when I was in law school.
Yeah. One of the things that I often share with the groups that we get to work with, many times are governmental entities, state agencies, is to say, public service is probably not where you're going to become wealthy. I mean, it's certainly not where you're going to become wealthy, but the work that you do has impact that is so broad and can touch so many lives that there is great meaning and great purpose in terms of being able to touch so many people with the work.
Well, I think that's the most important thing, that you go into public service. I think you're doing work that is meaningful. But the other thing I would throw into the equation is you're doing work that's interesting, that is intrinsically interesting every day. I never was bored working for the government, no matter what the position was, because you get a lot of responsibility and you're dealing with very real issues. And so if you're looking for the reward of enjoying going to work and feeling like you're doing something and having interesting work, public service is a great place to be.
So tell us what prompted you to ultimately run for mayor.
Well, and I've always had an interest in politics. History, politics was an interest of mine going back to junior high school. I'd worked in campaigns when I was in high school and in college, majored in political science, history in college, and law school is sort of a natural road after that.
Yeah.
And I think what got me interested in was when I became law director, and I'd run I was public defender. I ran 3 times for that. But when I was law director, I got to see how the city operated, and I started having thoughts about Nashville, the whole of Nashville, not just the criminal justice side of it, and had some thoughts on what I wanted to see happen in the city and some problems I thought I could address, and I thought it would be challenging. And so I decided to run when Mayor Purcell was not running for re-election, and got into the race. And even though I had been elected public defender, it's not a highly contested race for that. And I didn't have huge name recognition. My name was in the paper as law director and stuff like that, but not, people didn't know who I was. My name recognition was probably 3-4%, if that.
Okay.
If that. And I thought I was turning 50, and that sort of like, if I was ever going to do it, this is the time I was going to do it. And I ultimately thought good chance I could run and lose, and that wouldn't be a happy thing, but I'd be okay. I could handle it ego-wise and everything else.
Yeah.
And then I thought if I didn't run, I'd probably be kicking myself the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so I got really comfortable with the decision. And then my wife, my family were very supportive.
That's great. So you ultimately get elected.
Yeah.
And you go into office, I think in 2007. And once you go in, you don't get a lot of time before you have an economy that starts to fall apart. You have a public education system that's in trouble and needs some significant improvement. You've got several things that really put Nashville in somewhat of a precarious position. And yet here you are as the mayor. Talk a little bit about the process you used to go tackle some of those big issues that were absolutely critical to the success of the city going forward.
Yeah. So for me, the big things that we had to work on when I was campaigning, I talked about that we had 3 pitches as a city we had to hit every day. And to me, number one was public education. And I would say that's still the number one thing for Nashville.
Sure.
That we have to be a city where our public education is giving the kids here a chance to succeed in life, where our education is such that people want to stay in Nashville and want their kids to be raised here and go to our schools. And that businesses see that as we're producing good people, and that we're also a place where they want their employees' kids to go to school. So to me, that's key. Public safety, that issue has become vastly more complex over recent years.
Sure.
But it is still a matter that people want to live in a city that is safe. They want to not worry when they send their kids to schools. Yeah. They do not want to worry when they go out and go to an event. People want to be able to go downtown. They want to enjoy the whole city. And it's just fundamental. You got to have a safe city for anything to work. And then to me, economic development. I always thought, look, it's, education is great, and that's going to cost money. Public safety costs money. You want to be a place that is generating tax revenue. You want to be a place that's creating jobs and allowing people to succeed and move ahead and improve their lives. And I would say one of the things that I had some role in, and thousands of other people had equally large roles or more significant roles. But one of the things I'm really proud about Nashville is that I think in the last, 15 years, Nashville, our kids want to come back here. Yeah. That's everybody wants to come here, but our kids want to come back here. And when you think about living in a place where your kids want to come and live, that's kind of where you want to be. That's a good thing, And I have, personally, I have my sons here, my grandkids are here, my daughters hopefully will end up here, but that's an option. So those were my issues, and we came in and we were going to start working on them. And the first thing that happened, really out of the ordinary, was in 2008. I took office in September of 2007. In 2008, we go into the Great Recession, and that was sort of it wasn't totally unpredictable. I had been to the new mayor's school at Harvard when I first got elected. Okay. They do a little 4 or 5 day things for all the new mayors. And Larry Summers, who had been Secretary of the Treasury under Clinton, had been president of Harvard, and the famous economist, spoke. And he says, the good news, bad news for you new mayors is there's going to be a recession. That, just the fundamentals and where we're going, it's mean a recession another year. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it's going to be a dip. And you'll have issues about tax revenue and everything else. But it won't be bad. And so I knew that. But Nashville was doing well, and Nashville, I think, does better than most places with recessions. But then we hit the Great Recession, which was like something nobody expected. I mean, the whole thing collapsed, and and on the macro level at DC, they're dealing with the biggest economic crisis since the Depression, and it turns out to be the worst recession since the 1930s.
Yep.
And so unemployment goes up. We have less tax revenue, less money coming in from state and federal government, and we have to make decisions. We had to cut. We cut most departments 15, 20%, including my own. We had to do everything we could to kind of balance the budget. At the same time, I was trying to make sure we were investing in public safety, working on education, and then being really aggressive about economic development. And I think we were able to kind of keep all the balls in the air pretty well. But those were, everything became about how you get the budget under control, how you manage your way through that, which took, that was really 2 years. And I thought when the first started and how deep the recession was, I thought I was going to be elected mayor and kind of work on the issues I talked about. And I thought, well, really my cards are I'm going to deal with a downturn. It turned out that we came out of that in pretty good shape and came out strong because I think the city's fundamentals are so good. And on top of that, just to add to the recession, as we get to 2010, we're still in the recession. Things are loosening up a little bit. In May of 2010, as you know, we had a flood in Nashville.
Sure. So let's talk about, I want to get to the flood in just a minute because I want to definitely spend some time there because that was, I think, a moment where things were acute in terms of just the city trying to figure out a way to get to tomorrow when the flood hit. And yet you did an incredible job. But I want to get to that in just a second. Let's stay with the recession for just a minute. One of the things in the recession that was so counterintuitive and yet would love to hear your thinking is the bold way in which you made strategic investments, even in the midst of a fiscal crisis. And so the Music City Center, for example, almost $1 billion, already had a convention center that had struggled and was not doing what it needed to do for the city. And here you come along and say, even in the midst of this fiscal crisis, we're going to act courageously and boldly and make a big investment in Nashville.
Yeah, well, I think when I ran for mayor on part of my platform was I was going to build the convention center.
Okay.
And if you go back to that time period, there was still sort of the city hadn't decided which way it was going. And I was convinced from talking to the people who had been working on it for a long time that this was the right thing for the city, that we needed to do it. I mean, just our old convention center, which had served our city well, and we ultimately paid off all the bonds, and we ultimately sold it, and you have Fifth and Broad there now.
Sure, yeah.
Which really worked out well. But it was about the size, it had the capacity of a convention center in Peoria. Nothing against Peoria.
Yeah.
But Nashville, Tennessee is one of the most compelling, attractive city to visit in our country. So we had to do better. So I was convinced that we had to do this. And so on the day before I took office, I announced we were going to build it and laid out sort of a plan how we get there. And then the recession happened, and there were people who were opposed to a convention center. I mean, this was not a cakewalk to get that done.
Sure.
And they said, clearly you're going to stop. I mean, we have this recession now, and why would you build a convention center now? And I was convinced, and I think the vast majority of the supporters of the convention center were convinced that this was the exact right time to build it, because the money that we had to borrow, the bonds, would never be cheaper. There would be federal help on that would that were available for bonds. That the cost of the materials, because there was nothing, but nobody else was building. Cost of materials would be nothing. All the costs would be cheaper than they ever were.
Sure.
And I think I've been told that they've estimated that if you built the convention center, if you built it after the recession was over and after Nashville's boom was going, it would cost $50-60 million more than it cost.
Yeah.
So and the convention center, I think, really gave a shot in the arm to the city. All of a sudden Nashville's got things going on. We went through a long process getting a hotel. Omni came in, that was great. But there was a long process. But then we started having hotels being built. Restaurants started, investing in the city. And I think then all of a sudden Nashville's, even before the convention center was done, Nashville as a tourist destination just went through the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I think that was an important investment. And then we worked hard on economic development in terms of attracting businesses to stay, expand, or relocate to Nashville. Yeah. And it's worked out pretty well for Nashville.
So on those days, if you can reflect back where you're in the trenches trying to get that project done, you've got a lot of headwinds, and you got those that are critical of it. What were the leadership skills? What were the values? What was your focus in terms of leading people to a very big visionary project?
Well, part of it, give credit to the folks who had been working on this for a long time. As I say, the city really hadn't made a decision which way it was going at the time of the election. But there had been people who recognized for years that we needed a new convention center. Yeah. And so having their help and then collaborating with them was key. I think it was important that once we made a decision and studied it thoroughly, and a lot of groundwork had been done, that we stuck with it. Again, I thought it was the right thing to do it, even during the recession. But I think it was important to stick with it. And there were challenging times. I mean, I think the most challenging, there was the political opposition that we eventually, it got approved with 30 votes in the council out of 40. It got a good vote. But the biggest challenge I thought we faced was the hotel issue. One of the things about convention centers, and this was particularly true at this point in our nation's history, that there were several cities who had built convention centers. and not been able to locate or get a hotel to become sort of the anchor headquarters hotel.
Yeah. Dallas was one of those cities.
Dallas had
it?
problems.
Yeah.
Denver had problems. Portland had problems.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh had problems. And everybody said, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, if you don't have an anchor hotel to start with,
doesn't work.
You're not going to be able to book the big things because people want room blocks.
Sure.
And so here in the recession, we're going on and we're trying to get hotels or investors to build, and it's really, really hard. And so we started construction on which I didn't want to have happen, but that's the way the timing worked. We start construction on the convention center. We don't have a hotel deal.
Before you have a hotel deal.
And so I'm like, every day, that's all I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And so finally, we meet with Omni, and Omni, it's a great company, and we're in a great position during the recession to make investments. And we came to a deal, and they went and that was like, I picked that day as like the day when I felt like there was a mountain taken off my back. I mean, it was really, it's high up there on the list of my favorite days. And then after that, it just it started. They built 800 rooms, and that kind of opened up the floodgates of people booking into the future to come to Nashville, and then other hotels following. But that was absolutely key, and I think we made the right decision in moving forward.
Sure.
But that had to fall into place, and if it didn't, ultimately we would have been all right, but it would have been a lot more difficult.
Well, and then Omni's success sets the stage and becomes a model for. Now we've got
5 other hotels that built
a ton of hotels and still more under construction. Right. So it's just going crazy.
Another example I can give you of sort of investing in periods of economic difficulty is we had a very aggressive open space plan to acquire open space.
Yeah.
And we bought land in various parts of the city. And it was just because of the recession, you were getting bargains. And we had the ability to do that. I mean, we should have, I wish we had a lot more. We could have bought even more land, but that was a good time to be making those real estate investments. Think of doing that now.
Yeah.
I mean,
it would be ridiculous. Yeah. And the open spaces are something that I know my family and so many others use regularly in terms of just having a ton of recreational space in Nashville, which is of incredible value.
Yeah, so that's an important part of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to May 1st and 2nd, 2010. And the flood hits. We have how many inches of rain over the course of 48 hours?
13 to 14.
Yeah, 13 to 14. So obviously, as a result of that, the city is in absolute crisis mode in terms of trying to figure out what to do about all of this water that is accumulating, about rivers and streams and creeks that are rising, about people that are in dire straits,
right.
Some that literally have their lives in jeopardy where people are trying to get to them to save their lives. Talk through just those couple of days where the city's on the brink and you're having to lead, and talk a little bit in terms of the things that were critically important to you that would be the levers that would allow Nashville to not only get through it, but to get through it in such a way that it would be stronger after it was all said and done.
Yeah, I think first, this is like, talk about leadership issues. You can plan and you can have your dream about what you're going to work on and what you're going to do, and then there's a reality of what the cards.
Your agenda gets set for you at some level.
And so it's like the recession came, and we tried to live within our agenda with the recession, but the recession was just a dominant event.
Mm-hmm.
And then the flood happened, and I think the key thing for the flood in terms of how the city responded, and really the credit to this goes to the Metro employees and to the people in Nashville, it was a shock, but we weren't unprepared.
Uh-huh.
Our emergency management groups and first responders had studied floods, had studied mostly tornadoes, as the potential disasters. So when I got, the flood, it started raining on a Saturday afternoon, May 1st, and I am out doing mayoral public things in the morning. I get home and I get a call from Greg Highnote saying, come to the Emergency Communications Center. It's not going to stop raining. And so I go up there, and people knew what to do. I mean, it wasn't like I had to come in and start barking out orders or anybody else had to do that. We had people there who knew what to do, and it was happening. and they were responding heroically in the first day of this thing when schools were floating down the interstate and houses were being flooded, and it was all about rescue.
Yeah.
And they did a wonderful job. And then in the days afterwards in the cleanup, I think they also did a wonderful job. But the thing that really brought it home to me of how great the people are here is when I first got up there, I kept getting people advising me, and I got phone calls, and people would say, you got to issue a curfew tonight. You got to do a curfew now. And I was like, well, I mean, people, I'm on TV. We're advising people don't go out. The roads aren't safe. The interstates are closed. But people were doing what they were asked to do. And there were people already downtown for a Jimmy Buffett concert. And they got there early. People for Jimmy Buffett concerts go early to prepare themselves somehow.
Exactly.
But I thought everybody's behaving. I don't want to create a sense that we're losing control here. So we didn't do a curfew, and that worked out fine. And then people did what they were asked to do. And then the wonderful thing that happened was immediately people just started volunteering.
Yeah.
Hands on Nashville played a huge role in getting volunteers to homes and to help clean up. 20,000 volunteers, I guess, in the first weeks to help out. Lipscomb, you guys, I remember very distinctly, one of our early problems was the homeless who were impacted because of living by the river.
Yeah.
They were in danger, and there was no safe place to be. A lot of the homeless had pets that they wisely and kindly did not want to abandon during this crisis. And for us to find a place for the homeless to go and then say, we're bringing pets too, was kind of a challenge. And your father did not want a lot of publicity about this, but he said, they can bring the dogs.
Yeah.
And so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
But that was happening in different ways all over the place. So I always say that, the flood is about the people in Nashville. And we didn't panic. I mean, it wasn't like, people were scared, people were nervous, but people did what they had to do, and then they helped each other when it was over. And I think that positive sense that the city got about itself, that we could stick together, get through a crisis, I think that has helped us in the years since. I think after that, we kind of came out of that with the recession and everything else going on, that, this is a pretty good place. And the people here are pretty good, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth taking care of.
It was certainly a unifying event.
Yes.
I think, for the city.
Yes.
For sure. So talk a little bit about, as the mayor in that moment, you've got lots of people, they're doing their jobs, they're performing heroically. What's your role? What's going through your mind? What are you thinking as you're trying to coordinate all of this recovery and rescue efforts?
Yeah. I think obviously there are a series of decisions, and it's not like me saying, deploy a boat here, do this, do that. There's a series of decisions about resources and reaching out to, whether it's the private sector, philanthropy, or other government levels, to make sure things are happening. And so there's that, which is important. Then I think probably the most important thing a leader can do in that situation is to make sure communication's happening.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we tried to do with our press conferences, which we did regularly, was to bring in all the relevant Metro department heads and others outside of Metro who were working on issues so that the public could hear. You didn't want rumors about the water. We had a big water crisis because we had two water treatment plants. One of them was submerged. The other was in danger. And we were able to keep the second one open. The other one, the submerged one, was out of use for months and months. Yeah. But we were down to, just days of running out of water and having to bring in water. But we got through it. And again, this is a great thing about Nashville. We inundated the TV and the papers with telling people not to waste water, not to overuse it. And people responded, and we were able to build up our reserves. It said a lot about, I think, the people there too.
So Nashville gets through the flood, and then it gets through the recession, and then it really marks an era of growth for the city,
right?
That we're still living in, thankfully and fortunately today. Talk a little bit about what have been the active ingredients that has led to Nashville not only recovering from those things, but then becoming this really city that is become a model for the growth of American cities out there.
Well, I think that it was coming, no matter what. I mean, we could have made mistakes, and we could still make mistakes that knock it off track. But I think when I came into office, the foundations had already been set. I mean, there was Nashville clearly in the 12, 15 years before me taking office was becoming stronger and stronger economically. I think there was some recognition that Nashville was one of the ascendant cities in the South. It hadn't really hit the fever pitch, and there were some issues that had to still be addressed. But, I look at things like consolidated government in 1963, key thing. I mean, look at, that is still, I'd put that in the top 5 things since World War II that happened in Nashville that are just absolutely essential. I think the growth of the healthcare business here and the entrepreneurial spirit that hit. Universities. I mean, some of this was going on right when I was elected. I mean, it was pre-existed what was going on here at Lipscomb, Belmont, Vanderbilt. All were kind of a lot of action
emerging,
and that's been so. You can't underestimate the importance of our universities to the city's success. So that's going on, and then I think things like the Titans moving here. So that stuff is all there. And then I think when we started with the convention center, and we started, and there was more emphasis put on city of music and the place to visit and the place that people want to come. People figured it out. And then when you get here, I mean, my thing about Nashville is you get here, it's the friendliest place you're ever going to be. Quality of life is fantastic. And then particularly during my time, the cost of living here was so much less. That changes because we've been our own success.
Absolutely.
But it's still, I mean, you compare Nashville to cities of comparable size, and I think we beat any city that is comparable size-wise. We're still a pretty affordable city. I mean, real estate's gotten expensive.
That's why it's still so attractive.
Yeah, because the demand's there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think all those things kind of came together with the tourism, the convention center, more economic investment in terms of businesses relocating. People figuring out the quality of life was key here, and it sells itself.
Yeah. So, what are you most proud of during your tenure as mayor? Is there a moment or an initiative, or is there something that you look back on and say, "Wow, that really worked well"?
Yeah, so many things you work on don't last.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's just 2 things I would mention. One would be the city's response and being able to participate in the city's response to the English-only effort in 2009. That Nashville and that's an important moment. Nashville could have made a decision of saying, we're not welcoming anybody here who doesn't speak English. It's kind of anti-immigrant thing.
Yeah. And
we went the exact opposite direction. And I think and we never look back, and that's been a really important thing for our city. And the other thing I would mention personally that really means a lot to me is this program called Limitless Library, and it's survived and it's flourishing, and I'm hoping it's a model for other cities, where we broke down the walls between our public schools and our public library, which are 2 separate deals, and governance is all different, where they can buy books together. But the most important thing is that all our library books are available to our public schools through a program that gets them delivered to there in a day or 2.
Wow.
Including, music, movies, everything.
Yeah.
Increase the number of kids with library cards by, exponentially.
Yeah.
And it's been a great program, and that continues to flourish. And the credit goes, Donna Nicely, who was then the director of libraries, mentioned the idea to me. I loved it. We went forward with it. Jesse Register, I give him a ton of credit, because the schools were the ones who were a little nervous about it. Because it's all of a sudden like, the mayor and the government and the general government want to get involved in your schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa. But he did what had to be done. And he probably got more pushback than I got in my arena. And he was key.
That's great. What about one of the failures? Is there a failure that sticks out that you learned a lot from?
Oh, there's a lot of things that didn't happen. I mean, probably the thing that I think transit, we put a lot of resources, into the bus systems, bought buses, started bus rapid transit without dedicated lanes. But then we wanted to go up to the next level of dedicated lanes for bus rapid transit and hit a wall. We hit several walls. We hit neighborhood walls. We hit state legislature walls, not being interested in transportation and state roads. And I mean, I don't regret doing it. I just wish we had succeeded.
Yeah.
And we still need transit solutions in the city.
Sure. Yeah, that is still an unsolved challenge. So anything you learned from that?
I mean, I think there's always, I think what you learn, I think politically when things don't go right, I think usually what you learn when you look back on it is that somehow the communication was off.
Okay.
I think that was part of that, but I also think that we were naive in that we didn't know where the opposition was all going to come from. I was, I get when people say they don't want to change in their neighborhood. I mean, that's human nature. Or I don't want to change traffic patterns because I don't know whether it's going to be better or worse. That's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
But when the state legislature kind of weighs in and says, we're not going to give you any money for this, we're not going to let you do anything in state roads, like they have any idea what goes on in Nashville.
Yeah.
To me was a surprise, and it was pretty unproductive.
Yeah. So today you're doing a little bit of teaching every now and then at different universities. If you're going to give your last lecture, what would be the theme, or what would be some of the content in that last lecture to students? If you knew it was your last moment, what would you say?
Well, the thing I like teaching the most and I like talking about the most is history.
Uh-huh.
And I have a lot of interest in urban history and American history. So my two areas I've taught the most in has been urban history, and I think probably the New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt. And I guess I would try to convey to students that they should be optimistic about our country. They should be optimistic about their own future. That you look back at really tough times in American history, and resiliency and willingness to work together pay off in our country is a much stronger place than people realize. And an example I give sometimes is about New York City. You look at New York City, and I went to college in New York City at a tough time for New York in the 70s when, people thought cities were all going to just go away.
Yeah.
But New York has been through so much in so many different ways, but it always bounces back.
Uh-huh.
Whether it's after the turbulence of the 60s and the 70s, it bounces back, or whether it's after 9/11, it bounces back. And it always kind of comes back stronger. And it comes back stronger because I think it believes in itself. There's new people moving in. There's new ideas. It's about the future. And it goes back to that. I used to love to quote Bob Dylan, as Jimmy Carter did, for saying, if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying.
Huh.
And I think that countries, cities, people, that's the truth. If you're not thinking about, you're going to keep changing. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Former Nashville Mayor Karl Dean, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for the sense of optimism that you leave us. Thanks for the great leadership during your tenure as mayor of Nashville, and appreciate you taking time today to be with us.
Great. My pleasure.